Writers are liars. I don't remember who said this, but it's not true. In writing fiction, you dig deep and unearth portions of your own life that you've long forgotten and had purposely buried deep. Granted, sometimes it is smarter to change the ending. That being said, let me add, this photo is a lie. I haven't looked like this for a while, but it is me. I grew up reading and writing. My first published work was a pamphlet for the University of Houston entitled Between Your Navel and Your Knees. I'll leave you to figure out the subject matter. I love storytelling. My imaginary friends have rich, larger-than-life lives, encompassed in a few hundred pages, with definite beginnings, snappy middles, and above all, happy endings. My personal life is never as clearly defined. Beginnings are hard to locate. A new job, a school term, a family event, like a death or a wedding, might signal the start of something new, but it's never heralded with any fanfare, other than another link in the chain. I live in the beautiful, green, and very wet Northwest, married to a chef whose mantra is, life is a science project. As a result, there are chickens and turkeys in my backyard, as well as a fabulous vegetable garden, which also grows tobacco for an insecticide, as well as a hot meal on the table every day. For those of you who have longed for this, let me caution you. The old adage is true. Be careful what you wish for. When the gods are truly angry, they grant us our wishes. And the payment is always high. I fight an insidious 10 pounds every year of my life. I can't tell you when I fell in love with my husband, but I relate to the moment I decided to marry him. I was in the bath. It was a big tub. I expected him to join me, and when he was delayed, I called out, "Are you coming?" His answer convinced me he was Mr. Right. "Yes, but I'm making hors d'oeuvres." Can you imagine spending the rest of your life without a man like that? Like all marriages, we've had our ups and downs. More good times than bad. More recently, we've spent 14 nail-biting months living in an apartment while our house was rebuilt from a house fire. In the process, I have acquired an in-depth knowledge of kitchen cabinets, bathroom plumbing fixtures, and leaking roofs. If this writing thing doesn't work out, I plan to investigate becoming a contractor who specializes in on-time, under-budget remodels. Believe me, there is a fortune to be made by the builder who can deliver on his promises. My stories are about pretty men and strong women, about families that don't always work, and about the joy of finding love and the difficulty of making it stay. Nancy Brophy. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading. Today we are going to cover the case of Chef Dan Brophy that took place in Portland, Oregon in 2018, and how the same woman who wrote the words I just spoke would go on to end his life in a way she had written about years prior. This case bears a striking resemblance to some of the most noted cases in history, that being of an author who has gone on to write about a crime they committed in the past. However, that trope is turned on its head, as you will come to see. If this is your first video on this channel, consider subscribing below if you find yourself enjoying it. If you have any topics you would like to see me cover, leave them in the comments down below, or feel free to send me an email. With all of that out of the way, let us begin. If you were to ask Dan Brophy prior to June 2nd, 2018, how he thought his life was going, he would have told you that it was nearly perfect. He had his dream job teaching at the Oregon Culinary Institute and working part-time as a head chef at his friend's restaurant on the side. As a favor to that friend, he raised chickens and grew a variety of herbs and vegetables, which he sold to his students at a discounted rate. That way they were able to use fresh food in all of their dishes. He spent a considerable amount of time researching things that fascinated him, like marine biology and mushrooms, and last but certainly not least, he was in what he thought was a happy marriage with his longtime love, Nancy. Dan wasn't shy about how happy he was. In fact, it seemed to radiate off of him. He would often tell his students about his wife, calling her management, and saying that she was the brains of their home. She kept him balanced, and always brought him down to earth whenever he put too much on his plate, which occurred often. For Dan, the tragedy of the world was that there were some people who weren't as blessed in their lives as he had been, and he often took on too much trying to make people as happy as he was. This included him taking lower-paying jobs, or positions without pay to help friends out, or spending what little of the spare time he had at a homeless shelter in the area, feeding the needy. On Thanksgiving, Dan would have a pie bake-off with his class, where the goal was to make as many pies as possible. Afterwards, instead of indulging himself, Dan would spend the rest of the holiday traveling around the Portland area and giving the pies to people in need. People around Dan said it was hard to be irritated with him, even when he was being annoying, because you always knew he was trying to help. He'd spend hours with people he barely knew, trying to solve whatever problem they had, and he'd make it his mission to get people to smile.
My name is Daniel Brophy. I have been teaching since the Oregon Culinary Institute opened. My background in food spans approximately 45 years.
Customer said, is this a sushi bar?
The wagon rolls on Friday, so it is sort of the equivalent of my farmer's market. 100% satisfaction guaranteed. I'd say in the last 35 years I've had about 150 vegetable gardens.
Yeah, this is the life.
Despite his obvious contentment with his life, things weren't perfect in the Brophy household. Dan and Nancy had hit a financial rough patch, and it was beginning to take a toll on them as they approached their retirement age. Dan wasn't a big spender. He often thought material goods were helpful but unnecessary, and maintained a mostly frugal spending style. However, Nancy's own spending habits didn't align with Dan's. Though her friends and family would state that Nancy wasn't a flashy person, she did enjoy the finer things in life. Whatever she made at her various jobs, she spent, and she spent quickly, going so far as to garner a significant amount of credit card debt. She had drained their savings, as well as Dan's retirement funds, and had very little to show for it. Even paying their $1,500 a month mortgage on their small home was becoming a challenge. Because of her spending, it was becoming clear that Dan and her would not be able to retire anytime soon. But it was ultimately unclear how much Dan knew about his own fiscal well-being. He had mentioned to some students and peers that money was a bit tight, but the situation was more dire than he appeared to understand. He was still accepting jobs for little to no money, spending his time giving back to others, and in at least one instance, lent a friend a considerable amount of money. When asked about the hardship, Dan laughed it off entirely, stating that he didn't mind working and doing what he was doing until he was at death's door, because what people said was true. If you find what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Dan had found what he loved, and he was happy, but the same was not true for Nancy. Nancy, as stated, was the brains behind the couple. She was the one in charge of the finances, and the spending, and the organizing of their lives as much as possible. Nancy wore a lot of hats as well. Apart from being the head of the household and decision maker of the family, Nancy has been a caterer, was actively working as an insurance agent, and most notably, was an author of romance novels like The Wrong Brother, The Wrong Husband, The Wrong Cop, The Wrong Hero, The Wrong Seal, The Wrong Lover, and Hell on the Heart. Nancy was passionate about writing, specifically self-published romance novels that featured shirtless men on the cover. She thought it was her ultimate calling, and that as a writer, she was up there with the greats. She often talked about how she was smarter than most people gave her credit for, as she was able to balance complex plots and create fantasy scenarios with an amount of realism that was unheard of in her chosen genre. Despite her books not selling well, Nancy would often malign others who only wrote on the side, stating that they didn't have a real passion or drive to do what she did. However, her books seemed to be a dime a dozen, and rarely broke 20 reviews on Amazon, where they were self-published. Nancy often spoke to other self-published romance novelists, and found herself annoyed at the lack of recognition her work garnered. Out of her peers, she believed her writing to be the best, and it annoyed her when someone else's work surpassed hers. But for the most part, she feigned happiness at their success, knowing that any contempt would make her look petty and jealous. On her blog, NancyBrophyAuthor.com, Nancy spoke of her frustration mildly, writing in a post titled, "Consider the lilies. Consider the lilies. How they grow. They don't toil, neither do they spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." Luke 12:27. I've always loved the idea that it is possible to exist without toil and worry, but in my life I've never found it to be true. For years I had a different quote hanging in my office. The middle of anything always looks like a failure, which was to remind myself that while I continually seek instant gratification, it is more important to be working than to sit idle hoping good things will just come. Because I am a selfish being, sometimes when good happens, I don't take the time to celebrate. Instead, I look like a small child at Christmas, eager for the next present. This year I declared I would publish 12 books. In truth, it's kicking my ass. Fortunately for me, writing is a solitary profession, and my only immediate family and a few good friends have seen me ride the roller coaster of emotions from high to low and back again. I'm not going to publish my to-do list. It exhausts me to contemplate the unending column that even if I finished doing each and every one, tomorrow, more would appear. However, I will say every time I'm able to cross another line item off, it is a small victory. Unlike Dan, she was forced to take other jobs to supplement their income, forcing her real passion to the side. But according to the people who knew Nancy the best, she pretended that she didn't mind, but it annoyed her immensely. She wanted to be seen as a writer first and foremost, and the fact that she was forced to work odd jobs outside of it was irritating. As previously mentioned, Nancy also had a penchant for spending. In her blog about her life, she alluded to the fact that she found her life, as picturesque and quiet as it was, to be bland and boring. She knew that she had what so many others had dreamed about, but she wanted more. She came to resent her cozy home and the animals that Dan decided to raise in the backyard. Friends would state that Nancy had become enamored with the idea of traveling outside of Oregon, experiencing new things, with or without Dan, and trying the finer things in life. She wanted adventure and romance, the kind she would write about in her books, and she felt, on a certain level, she was owed that. Her blog casually mentioned her own dissatisfaction with her life, and her want to explore the world. But it was clear that there was something in the way, or rather, two things, money and Dan. Dan was frugal, and, as Nancy had described him on occasion, simple. He didn't want more for himself or for them. He was content with where he was, and anything he gained, he was happy to part with. If they went to a store, he would buy the cheapest of everything, unless it was food related, because he simply didn't care to spend. So when Nancy began to spend more on their lives, buying trips and various material goods, he was confused. Nancy tried to get Dan to understand where she was coming from. She was okay with their lives. It was objectively fine, but she wanted more, and if he loved her, he would understand. As she continued to bring home expensive items and gifts for herself, she likewise began lying to Dan, telling him that she had gotten a bonus at work and was making more money, which was why she could afford these new things. Unbeknownst to Dan, she had begun to take out more credit cards in their names, and was draining their savings. As time went on, things didn't get better for Nancy. On some level, it appeared she was trying to fake it until she made it, wanting to act like a famous author without the actual fame. She did a book signing at a local small bookstore, only to have no one show up, and she felt as if her books were getting less and less attention than they had before. Worse still, she had drained Dan's retirement and destroyed their credit, which he almost knew nothing about. For Nancy, the idea of telling Dan was daunting. She wasn't happy in their life together, but she also knew that she couldn't very well complain about it without seeming ungrateful. She wanted adventure, romance, and thrill, and she had spent more than they had trying to get that. Telling him about what she had done and how she was unhappy would make her into the bad guy, and she didn't want to do that. Nancy was treading water, trying to find a way around the predicament she had gotten herself and her husband into, and then it hit her. In November 2017, she remembered the article she had written in 2011 for her friend's self-publishing blog, See Jane Publish. The article was titled, How to Murder Your Husband by Nancy Brophy. As a romantic suspense writer, I spend a lot of time thinking about murder, and consequently, about police procedure. After all, if the murder is supposed to set me free, I certainly don't want to spend any time in jail. And let me say clearly for the record, I don't like jumpsuits, and orange isn't my color. Motives. Number one is financial. This is big. Divorce is expensive, and do you really want to split your possessions? Or if you married for the money, aren't you entitled to all of it? The drawback is the police aren't stupid. They are looking at you first, so you have to be organized, ruthless, and very clever. Husbands have disappeared from cruise ships before. Why not yours? Number two. Lying, cheating bastard, deception of any sort. This is a crime of passion. In anger, you bash his head in or stab him with a kitchen knife. Most of the time, there is a trail that leads directly to you. Each type of murder leaves clues. A crime of passion does not look like a stranger was involved. And who is left to clean the blood from your carpeting? Number three, fell in love with someone else. Usually financial is also involved here. Let's say your church frowns on divorce. You need to be a widow so you won't fall out of favor with your religion. At this point, I should mention that it helps if you aren't too burdened by the 10 Commandments. Number 4. Abuser. This one is tough. Anybody can claim abuse. What is abuse? To a teenager, it might look different than to a spouse. As a motivation, this reason usually comes up after you've been arrested. Not a lot of abused wives dial 911 upon burning down the house with their husband still in it. Number 5. It's your profession. Now we're talking. You already possess both skill and knowledge. You have the moral ambiguity necessary to carry it off. Quick hit and you fade from the scene. Get your payment up front from someone else, because life insurance probably won't send a check. Options to consider. Guns. Loud and messy, requires some skill. If it takes 10 shots for the sucker to die, either you have terrible aim or he's on drugs. Knives. Really personal and up close. Blood everywhere. Ew. Garrett. How much upper body strength does it even require to strangle a person? Random heavy piece of equipment. Usually this involves hitting someone hard with a baseball bat or a pipe wrench you just happen to have in your hand. Poison. Considered a woman's weapon. Arsenic is easy to obtain. Worse, easy to trace. It takes a month or 2 to kill someone. Plus, they are sick the entire time. Who wants to hang out with a sick husband? Knowledge of pharmaceuticals would be handy. Availability would be even better. A word of caution though, watch out for poisons found in nature. They are not a sure thing. Too little, too much. Your mother always told you to marry a doctor. Now you know why. Hiring a hitman. Do you know a hitman? Neither do I. And an amazing number of hitmen rat you out to the police, or blackmail you later. Hiring a lover. Never a good idea. The husband dies and the wife gets the money. The lover doesn't always win in this scenario. Sometimes he too finds himself facing a loaded gun. I find it easier to wish people dead than to actually kill them. I don't want to worry about blood and brains splattered on my walls. And really, I'm not good at remembering lies. But the thing I know about murder is that every one of us have it in him or her when pushed far enough. What constitutes as a good romantic suspense anyways? What happened that forced a person into this situation? How will they justify this action? By the way, he needed killing is not a legal defense. Can they keep a secret? Confidence whispered in the dark is no longer a secret. What if killing didn't produce the right results? Would they do it again? Could they do it again? What if they liked it? Whoa. There's an idea for a new story. Nancy's narrative building and daydreaming led her to her own published work, and she realized that if anyone could kill their husband and make it look like an accident, who better than her? Nancy didn't want to divorce Dan, nor did she want to separate from him at all. He was a good guy, with a wonderful family, and she had grown accustomed to their lives together, even if she did want to seek greener pastures. If she were to tell Dan that she had lost their retirement savings and accrued thousands of dollars of debt in their names, he would say, "I told you so," about her spending, and that was something she didn't want to hear. Likewise, telling Dan that she had led them to financial ruin and that she wanted a divorce so she could travel the world and seek adventure would mean being in a worse financial spot than she had been in before. His family would resent her, and she knew that her friends would likely pick Dan in the divorce, leaving her with virtually no one. But if Dan were to suddenly die out of nowhere in a tragic murder, she would be the grieving widow who people would expect to want to travel. She would be given a pass to do whatever she wanted, as she would be in a state of mourning. Friends and family would rally around her, taking care of her, giving her anything she needed. Not to mention, the publicity from Dan's death would serve as promotion for her own books. She could even write about the heartbreak and spin it into an entire money-making operation. For Nancy, it was a win-win. The only downside was that Dan would die, and she was more than okay with that. She also believed herself to be one of the most gifted minds in the modern world, and her profession meant that she was uniquely equipped to carry about a murder flawlessly. As an author, she often spoke about how she would run through every possible scenario for her characters, making sure that their actions were believable to the reader. Likewise, she often would do hours of research, finding out how to carry out certain crimes in order for her books to appear realistic, and this crime would be no different. For her books, The Wrong Cop and The Wrong Seal, she had spent hours on Google, looking into the lives of cops and Navy SEALs, making sure she got every detail of their jobs correct, down to the make and model of the guns they were using. And, in Nancy's mind, this would be no different. But, as it would turn out, killing your husband is a lot different than writing a romance novel. And Nancy wasn't particularly good at either. On the morning of June 2nd, 2018, Dan left his house the same time he always did. to open up the Oregon Culinary Institute. The school worked like a well-oiled machine, and Dan always stuck to his schedule. He was often the first to arrive at the building, and he would spend the first hour or so on his own, making coffee, setting up his lessons, and making sure everything he needed was ready and accounted for. His students would slowly trickle in, grabbing a fresh coffee and starting their morning with a normal conversation with Dan. But that day was different. Dan arrived early, like he usually did, and unlocked the doors. He had begun to make coffee and set up his class, when, out of nowhere, he was shot in the back. He turned around, and he was shot once more in the chest, then collapsed to the ground. The shooter then left the building, locking the doors behind them, making sure that Dan would bleed out on the ground before anyone arrived. When Dan's students got there, they found it was weird that they couldn't get in. Someone knocked on the door loudly, thinking that Dan was just inside and had forgotten to unlock them. Others thought he slept in or was sick. It took a while before another teacher arrived and they were able to get in. But once they were, they found Dan's body. One of his students tried to do CPR on him, hoping beyond reason they would be able to save his life. But by the time EMTs arrived, he was already dead. Dan Brophy was well-loved, and nothing showcased that as much as his senseless murder. His students were traumatized after finding his body, and many dropped out of the program, citing that it wouldn't be the same without Dan. Other students made a memorial video for him, showcasing what a loving, fun person he was. His peers mourned him and considered shutting down the program, as they felt like he was the heart of the Culinary Institute. And, like she had planned, Nancy was being tended to by their friends and family. She began to talk to them more openly about her financial issues, stating that the house she shared with Dan was about to be foreclosed on, and that without him, she was scrambling to keep things together. People were shocked to find out how little money the couple seemed to have, as Dan had always seemed so put together and carefree. But Nancy rebutted by stating that the cost of the funeral was going to bankrupt her. A memorial service was done outside of the Culinary Institute, and hundreds gathered to honor Dan. And while everyone was upset, people noticed that Nancy seemed to be smiling to herself at inappropriate times. However, those who knew the couple defended her, stating that she was grieving in her own unique way. As for the crime, the police were at a loss. The murder didn't make sense. Dan had money and his bank cards in his wallet, and nothing was taken from him or from the crime scene. The institute was equipped with plenty of expensive items, yet they remained completely untouched. There wasn't a struggle at the scene, and it appeared that someone had followed Dan in just to shoot him and then leave. But no one had any motive to kill Dan. Senseless acts of violence like this, where there was no motive at all, were rare. And rarer still was it happening to such a nice, well-liked person. The police immediately were at a loss, unsure of how to proceed. There appeared to be little to no evidence of anything that would have led to this conclusion. That is, until 2 days after the murder, when Nancy reached out to the police and asked that they provide her a statement that she wasn't a suspect in her husband's murder, so she could cash in his life insurance. The questions struck them as odd, as he had just died, and they had barely started their investigation. They were still in the process of combing through hours of CCTV footage from around the institute, as it didn't have any security cameras on site, and they couldn't very well see that anyone was above suspicion. Nancy insisted, though, that she needed the money as quickly as possible, and implored them to give her a written statement, which they refused. Upon looking more closely into Dan's life, they found that he had multiple incredibly high life insurance policies taken out on him by Nancy through her job as an agent. Despite being in dire straits financially, Nancy had signed Dan up for multiple policies, which they had to pay over $1,000 a month on. Dan dying in the manner that he did meant that she would be the sole beneficiary of one $800,000 policy, and another that was well over $1 million. Not to mention the fact that because Dan died at work, she was entitled to workman's compensation from his job. Nancy's behavior and the massive windfall she was about to receive struck the police as suspicious, but it was days later when they realized that Nancy might have been the one to have killed her husband, as the police combed through thousands of hours of footage from security cameras of establishments around the Culinary Institute. One car stuck out amidst the rest, Nancy's. Her minivan was seen multiple times in the area prior to Dan's murder. Then directly after, according to Nancy's own statement given to the police the day of the crime, that couldn't be possible. When the police had spoken to Nancy, she told them that she'd been home all day when she got a call about a shooting in the area. She stated she hadn't been told who was hurt, and she assumed Dan was fine. She likewise called Dan's mother, Karen, that she had just woken up to the news that someone had been shot at the school and hadn't gotten dressed yet. At the same time, her son-in-law mentioned that morning he hadn't been able to get a hold of her until after his father was killed, despite calling her in the hours before. Nancy had given herself an alibi, one that she thought was rock solid, but she hadn't believed that the CCTV for Portland would be able to definitely show her driving around the area of the shooting. Nancy's van was caught multiple times, and it appeared as if she were inside of it. The van was still in her possession after all, and she stated that there was no one else who had the keys. With this piece of information under their belt, they continued to look into Nancy, albeit quietly. When Nancy had initially been interrogated, the police asked her if they owned any guns, to which, surprisingly, she said yes. Everyone who knew Nancy and Dan knew that they weren't gun people. Dan especially felt uneasy around the weapons. But while on a trip to Florida, Nancy made the case that they should get one, just for protection. Dan felt uneasy about the purchase, but Nancy insisted, saying that it would be helpful with her writing, as she wanted to write another book, this time centered around crime. The police asked Nancy to turn over the gun. That way they could rule it out as the murder weapon. Without even the slightest hesitation, Nancy did, and it was quickly determined that the gun had never been fired. Following that, there appeared to be no other record of Nancy or Dan owning any firearms, and this almost eliminated Nancy as a suspect. That is, until the cops looked into her internet history and they found that Nancy had been researching ghost guns. Ghost guns are defined as a privately made firearm that lacks a commercially applied serial number, rendering the weapon untraceable. The term is mostly used in the United States by gun control advocates, but it is increasingly being used by gun rights advocates and some in the firearm industry. Because home-manufactured firearms for personal use is not considered to fall under the U.S. federal government's authority to regulate interstate commerce, as opposed to interstate commerce per the Commerce Clause, individuals making their own firearms are not subject to federal or state commercial background check regulations. Individuals making their own firearms are not subject to federal or state commercial background check regulations. Persons otherwise prohibited from owning firearms under the Gun Control Act of 1968 are still legally barred from the manufacture, transfer, or possession of firearms or ammunition, regardless of the method of manufacture or acquisition. Nancy had learned about ghost guns in her research into killing Dan. She found an article in the New York Times that talked about how people sell kits online for various gun parts. The article stated that these kits can be used to make it appear as if the gun had never been fired after a crime, and how it was incredibly easy to make it appear that the gun was entirely unused. After reading the article, on Christmas Eve 2017, Nancy's internet history showed she bought a kit off of ghostgun.com that would fit the gun she brought to the police. Upon getting this information, the police knew at once that Nancy had been behind the murder of her own husband. She had clearly been in the area of the shooting, caught on multiple cameras, had access to a weapon that matched what had been used to kill him, bought a kit online that would make it impossible to tell if the weapon had been used in the murder, and she stood to make a fortune off of Dan's death. While the investigation was still ongoing, Nancy began telling people that her husband had been killed by a homeless man or woman in the area, and that the camps of homeless people in Portland were dangerous. She began to tell everyone who could listen that her husband's murderer was out there on the streets, and his killing had been a robbery gone wrong. Multiple people asked her how she knew this, or where she got this idea, and she told them that it was the only thing that made sense. She likewise took this theory to the police themselves, who she didn't realize were already onto her. She told them that it was likely that someone had followed Dan into the institute that morning and had tried to rob him. Despite the evidence showing that could not have been the case, she tried in vain to get the police to pursue that line of thinking, saying that she heard rumors of a homeless man who was bragging about the killing afterwards. Little did she know, just 3 months after her shooting her husband, in what she was sure was the perfect crime, she would be arrested and charged with his murder. On this channel, we have covered one case in which the person accused of the crime has taken the stand in their own defense. And in that video, we went over why going on the stand in one's defense is risky and ultimately a bad move. In jury trials, it's imperative that the 12 people assigned to choose your fate like and trust you as a person. And the more you're able to speak, the more chances you give them to find reasons to dislike you. In certain literature written by ex-jury members, some discussed how they felt the defendant was guilty based on how they dressed and how they chewed gum. Small actions and mannerisms, like not looking remorseful or sad enough, can cause members of the jury to disregard certain evidence in favor of their own intuition. But that's just when a person is sitting next to their lawyers and not speaking. The moment you open your mouth, the likelihood of you saying something that someone will take issue with skyrockets. Usually, in cases like this, a defense attorney would tell their client that going to the stand is a risky move and persuade them against it. However, because Nancy genuinely believes that she is smarter than most people around her, and she outright believes she had planned for every scenario when considering this crime, keeping her off the stand is borderline impossible. Like Diane Downs and Tony Toad, her belief that she can convince people to believe her lies is greater than the amount of evidence that has been brought forward so far. She believes that she can make the evidence look circumstantial at best, and that people would be more prone to believing her if they just spoke to her. However, the evidence that she claims is circumstantial is anything but, given that her ex-cellmate came forward and testified that Nancy told her how she had killed her husband. Her defense team's strategy was to state that evidence was weak, couldn't have killed Dan because she loved him. When she went on the stand, that would be the sole goal of the defense. Nancy would need to appear remorseful and upset about his death, actively still grieving, even though the trial would be taking place years after the murder. However, how successful she was remains to be seen. Before I play the video of her direct examination, let me read a couple of comments from the original video of the trial. Her demeanor is repulsive. Your husband is dead and you are accused. What the heck is funny about any of this? She has totally turned me off with her laughter and trying too hard to be likable. If her lawyers would get to the damn point about anything, that might help. I have never seen a murder defendant behave as if he or she is at a reunion. She's telling stories, laughing it up. So odd. She's so arrogant she still thinks she is better at talking than the actual physical evidence against her. Let's see how she does.
Let me know if you can't hear me,
I will.
because you can't read my lips.
Sorry.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Wichita Falls, Texas.
And how big is Wichita Falls, Texas?
It's 100,000, but a lot of that is the air base that's there.
Okay. When did you move to Oregon?
1990 or 1991,
And why did you move to Oregon?
because I wanted to take a year off, and I thought going to culinary school sounded like a whole lot more fun than saying, "Oh, I'm just taking a year off."
Okay. Do you remember the first time you saw Dan Brophy?
Oh yeah,
Tell me about it.
I culinary school in Western Culinary, which was where I was, had a program where 101 was the first class you took, and it was 6 weeks long, and you were separated out from the rest of the students. So when we joined the students, Dan had been hired either that day or the day before. So it was like we all came together at the same place at the same time.
If the defense had practiced direct examination with Nancy, this would have been the first question they would have asked, and they would have implored her to be as sentimental and nostalgic as possible, using as much airy language as she could. If you were to ask for the first time you met your romantic partner in a public setting, chances are you speak about the first time you saw them in a loving way. You locked eyes across the room, they were so beautiful, it was love at first sight, and so on, are all things that people are accustomed to hearing when they are asked something like this. But Nancy is as matter of fact as possible, and in fact, barely mentions seeing Dan, outside of him being hired the same day she started culinary class. While this doesn't mean she is guilty or innocent, and should have little to no bearing on the actual evidence, the fact that her answer to a question about seeing her deceased husband for the first time had more to do with her than with him is something that at least one jury member is likely to notice, whether that is subconscious or not. She also appears at ease on the stand, and not as if she is upset for being on trial for a heinous crime like murder.
Had you ever met a guy anything like Dan Brophy before you met him?
No, no, he was unique.
Can you tell us 5 things about him, maybe 5 things that separated him from the pack for you?
He was smart. He was really smart. And he was funny. You could have I laughed all the time when I was with him, and a lot of people going, "What'd he say? What'd he say? What'd he say?" Because he was very dry in his sense of humor. Um, he was kind. He was so kind. That probably won me over more than lots of other things might have. He not only thought outside the box, this man lived outside the box. He really did not operate going forward the way most of us did. But the thing I probably liked the best about him, he loved me. And if that isn't a big, I don't know, a big number one item, I don't know what is, and I loved him back.
For reference, if you stand accused of murdering your husband and are asked what you loved about him, try not to say the number one reason you loved him was because he loved you. Try instead to showcase their numerous other amazing attributes, as it will show that you liked them for more than what they could simply provide for you emotionally. Nancy's response makes her appear selfish, and if her favorite things about Dan have less to do with him and more to do with her, this would easily be picked up by the jury. It should also be stated that Nancy is a writer whose main genre is romance novels. The fact that she cannot seem to state anything deep or moving about Dan and his life, which was filled with amazing moments, is deeply troubling. By this point in the trial, the jury had already heard from his son, his students, and his parents about what an amazing guy he was, how he gave back to the community, and more. The fact that his wife seems unable to speak about him with the same kind of reverence is telling.
How many years were you together?
24 years, 10 months, 2 days.
That's pretty precise. What are you measuring from?
We were friends for a couple of years before before our friendship moved further. I count it from the time our friendship moved further. You can be friends with a lot of people, but it doesn't count. Once you've said we're committing to others, people in other ways, then that's where I start the counting.
Her discussions about her relationship are entirely too formal for what she is trying to accomplish. If she had stated she remembers how long they were together because he was the most important person in her life, or because that was the best day of her life, the jury would sympathize with her. However, her matter-of-fact delivery that she remembers down to the day they got together, because that was when he asked her to be official, is disconcerting rather than endearing.
Did you and Dan Brophy complete each other or balance each other out?
Completely. I'm a flawed person. Dan's a flawed person. We came together and made up one really good team. His weaknesses were my strengths. My strengths tended to be his weaknesses. And together, it just fit immediately and never stopped.
When the two of you were together, did you try to give him a platform from which he could do his very best work?
I did. Dan was bright. He was funny. He was lots of things, but he was also humble. And this is a man who needed a cheerleader. And I was his cheerleader. And this was not a one-way street. He was mine as well. But I helped him become more known for who he was, and because he would have just stayed in the shadows. He was that kind of guy, and he needed somebody to say, hey, this guy over here, he's really, really smart. You ought to listen to him,
Nancy painting Dan as the type to stay behind in the shadows, as if he wasn't being recognized for his work prior to them meeting, is false. His family stated that they were unhappy with this characterization, as when Nancy met Dan, he was a teacher at a prestigious culinary institute and had plenty of professional accolades.
We've heard a lot during this trial about Dan and his demeanor in social settings.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fair to say that Dan was socially unaware?
No. Dan Dan was very aware. He just wasn't a big participant. He didn't need to fill in the blank space. You know, a lot of times when there's a void in the conversation, somebody absolutely feels that they have to jump in and say something. Not Dan. Dan's perfectly okay with silence. So I'm sorry to say I lost the direction I was going there.
Okay,
I'm
let me
so
ask you
sorry.
this.
I was supposed to be paying attention, but
Let
I
me
went
stop
off.
you.
Okay.
Let me stop you. You've been described as the one who had better social skills, or the front of the house, I think
Yeah.
is what someone said, and that Dan was back doing the cooking or preparing meals or being the quiet guy to the side. Were there times that Dan helped you socially?
Oh, yeah. Oh, if someone said earlier, I'm a chatter, and I don't remember who said that, but I am a chatter, and I can just start running. And I never met a rabbit hole I didn't like. And there were times that Dan would come out and he would be so subtle, and he would make this little move, and I knew I needed to calm down, back up, because he was trying to help me not run away with things.
Let me back you up.
Oh, sorry.
This move.
And actually, he did it. He did it with this hand because it was a C for chill. And it was real calm. If you were standing next to him, you wouldn't have noticed it. But I was looking at him, I knew exactly what he meant.
If you were on your way down a rabbit hole, he had a very subtle way of kind of trying to bring you back. We've heard that Dan didn't always lock doors. Is that true?
True.
We've heard that he collected stuff, lots of stuff. Is that true?
That's true.
What did you think about that?
One, well, this is a complicated answer. All right. I was perfectly okay with that. And the reason why I was perfectly okay with that is Dan didn't collect stuff that didn't mean anything. Everything he collected, he had a purpose for, or he could see a future purpose for. It wasn't like, he was gathering stuff he didn't need. It was gathering stuff that he could see he would need, maybe not today, but next week. To give you the best example of that, I was still catering in a kitchen I didn't own when Dan encouraged me, and I did it, started purchasing equipment. By the time I had my own kitchen, because of Dan's help on this, I was ready to go. I had all the equipment I needed. I didn't have to stop and buy equipment. Dan had the kind of vision where you could see it further down the road. And he had that vision for me, and he had that vision for himself as well.
Did Dan tend to, well, I don't want to use that word. Would it be fair to say that Dan's kind of working style, at least to the untrained observer, seemed chaotic?
Oh, yeah. Even to his wife, there were times when it seemed chaotic.
Was it?
No. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had a plan to get through to the end. And you may not have thought, if you were a stranger, that he really knew everything was going on, but I assure you, Dan knew everything that was going on. And later on, he'd start a conversation in which I thought, well, Dan wasn't even paying attention to that, but Dan knew every detail. That was not him. He knew what was going on.
You said that you were flawed and that he completed you. Were there parts of your personality or parts of who you were that maybe could be frustrating to Dan or exasperating to Dan?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I don't think that I'm not coming into this situation perfect by any wild stretch of the imagination. And I am a person who has been self-employed all my life. And if I see an opportunity, I tend to leap in feet first. And Dan is not like that at all. Dan is research. Okay, we'll do this. And here's how we'll do it. Me, I'm already in the middle of the water before I think, maybe a plan would have been a good idea. What do you think?
How did you guys resolve those times when maybe your imperfections were coming to the surface?
Well, we talked, every night we sat in the hot tub and we talked, and the TV wasn't on, and we were sitting there, and he was giving me guidance on my catering company and what to do, and he was telling me about his day, and it's the frustrations we had were relatively minor, but I don't want to jump into a rabbit hole here, but there is an issue I could go to.
That's all right. We're going to try to keep you out of the rabbit holes.
Thank you.
In the nearly 25 years that you were with this man, did you ever doubt Dan Brophy's commitment to you?
No. And I never doubted his fidelity either.
Did you ever doubt your own commitment to him?
Never once.
What's it like to be without him now?
It's like you've lost an arm, like you're just not as good as you were when you were with him. When you were with him, you were the best you could be when you were together with him. And now it's like, yeah, I function, but there's something missing.
This is something that should have been said earlier, and still, it would have been better had she phrased it in a way where she wasn't pulling focus away from her husband, as again, all of her statements about her husband's death have been about her, not him. We will fast forward a bit to a separate part of her testimony, as the defense spends an almost unreasonable amount of time going over her health, and a surgery she needed to get, and how her and Dan lost a considerable amount of money over a prolonged period of time, which she stated was solely because of medical issues, and not her spending habits.
You and Dan made choices early in your marriage, is that right?
It is.
Could Dan have taken a job, for instance, as an executive chef and made a lot more money?
He could have. He could have.
There was testimony from the OCI folks saying that they I think they got salaries like in the $50,000 to $60,000 range, and those just never changed over the years.
That's true.
If Dan had wanted to make money, with his skills and his intelligence and certainly as well known as he was, could he have made a lot of money if he wanted to?
He could have. He could have, but everything is in life is a trade-off, and he would have had to have given up things that he loved, like the garden, but more than anything else, he loved teaching, and he was good at it. And he was the sort of guy who, when you came out of his class, you knew, you could identify the difference between rosemary and something else. You knew your herbs, you knew your product, and you knew your techniques. He loved teaching. He loved helping people who came to him and said, I'm not getting the math on this. Can you show me? So yeah, he could have made a lot more money doing something else. He could have been an executive chef for any number of restaurants in town, but we chose happiness over anything else. And so if he's happy and he's not making as much money, that didn't bother us, I was totally okay with what he contributed to the household, and the fact he wasn't working 80 hours a week to bring that money in, that we were together.
Throughout the testimony, in times of stress or high emotion, Nancy will shake her head. This is something that is repeated often, usually when she is on the verge of tears. When she is stating facts, she tends to keep her head more still. However, in this instance, where she is talking about the fact that she was happy with Dan's low salary, her head shakes. Though there isn't enough evidence to state this with any certainty, that kind of movement, being incongruent with her established mannerisms, can imply that she isn't being honest in this instance. That, aside from the fact that her friends would go on to testify that she wanted to travel and wanted more money to spend on her book research, goes against her statements being honest.
You and Dan made choices early in your marriage, is that right?
It is.
Could Dan have taken a job, for instance, as an executive chef and made a lot more money?
He could have. He could have.
There was testimony from the OCI folks saying that they I think they got salaries like in the $50,000 to $60,000 range, and those just never changed over the years.
That's true.
If Dan had wanted to make money, with his skills and his intelligence, and certainly as well known as he was, could he have made a lot of money if he wanted to?
He could have. He could have, but everything is in life is a trade-off, and he would have had to have given up things that he loved, like the garden. But more than anything else, he loved teaching, and he was good at it. And he was the sort of guy who, when you came out of his class, you knew, you could identify the difference between rosemary and something else. You knew your herbs, you knew your product, and you knew your techniques. He loved teaching. He loved helping people who came to him and said, I'm not getting the math on this. Can you show me? So yeah, he could have made a lot more money doing something else. He could have been an executive chef for any number of restaurants in town, but we chose happiness over anything else. And so if he's happy and he's not making as much money, that didn't bother us, I was totally okay with what he contributed to the household, and the fact he wasn't working 80 hours a week to bring that money in, that we were together,
Again, Dan's friends and family stated that he was content with his life in the Portland area, and while he would travel, he did more so for Nancy's enjoyment.
I'm taking you back to between 2014 and 2017, when the financial wheels have come off.
Okay.
You've had this sudden loss of income, and at the same time, an increase in expenses. Did you think that was going to cause the economic upheaval that it did?
No. It was kind of like dominoes. I mean, one fell and then another fell, and you're thinking, really, you can stop falling now, and it didn't.
What did you do in the beginning? What did you do personally to address this upheaval? Did you have some Band-Aid solutions?
Yes, I did. The first year was easy to fix. The first year was a very small amount of money. And what we did was I wrote a life insurance policy on Dan, which immediately brought in a couple of $1,000s. The next thing I did was I borrowed money from an interest-free account that we had life insurance in, and that brought in enough money to get our house payments made, and it didn't cost us anything.
Let's talk first about that policy.
Okay?
Was that a policy that was taken out in November of 2016? Is that right?
That's right.
And how much was that policy? Do you remember?
250,000. I think it was 200, and there was some accidental on top of it.
And I don't remember which insurance expert, but it was suggested that you could have had a different $200,000 policy that would have cost you less.
Yes.
Is that true?
It's true.
Would you have gotten a commission on it?
Not the way it was suggested, but I wouldn't have gotten a commission, which would have been number one. And number two, it wouldn't have happened as quickly as the policy we chose. What he suggested was that we go through underwriting. And underwriting takes sometimes up to 6 months to make a policy come. We didn't have 6 months. We needed it to happen today. We had financial issues, and we were doing it more for the financial issue than we were doing it so we'd have another insurance policy. So we didn't have the time to wait for fully underwritten.
Okay, so this brought a quick influx of cash into your home.
It did.
And if you continued to pay the premiums on that policy for a year, you'd be able to keep the commission? So was it kind of like a no-interest loan?
That was exactly what it was like.
Now, let's talk about this other quick Band-Aid that you talked about, the Forester's policy. Forester's is a weird kind of policy, right?
It is.
I shouldn't call it weird. It's just unique.
It is unique.
And does it have a savings component to it?
Yes. You pay a premium. Part of it goes for life insurance. Part of it goes to a savings account. And the savings account at the time we bought it, I believe, was 5.85%. Now, real frankly, if we'd put our money in savings in the bank, we would have gotten somewhere maybe 1% of interest. This gave us 5.85, and it was required savings. You might not have noticed this, but I'm betting you did, that I am not a saver. And so being forced to save helped me, and that was what we liked best about that. Also, we're
No,
not
but-
going down that rabbit hole.
When you put money, when you paid this premium, part of it went into the savings account, part of it went toward the life insurance benefit.
Exactly. And when we borrowed from the savings account.
So you're actually taking money out of your own savings account.
That's right.
And when you pay that back, do you pay it back with interest?
You don't ever have to pay it back. They don't care. It's, because you're continuing to put more money in each month, but they don't care if you don't pay it back. It doesn't bother them at all. I never got a done letter from them, said, really, you need to pay this back. It was interest-free, and we didn't pay it back.
So that was a good Band-Aid.
That was a good Band-Aid.
Through this testimony, Nancy is trying to state that the incredibly expensive life insurance policies that she took out on Dan were so that she, the insurance agent, could get commission, which she viewed as a loan. However, that is ridiculous for a fair amount of reasons, not least being the amount she would have to be making in commissions off of this policy would be less than what she would be paying monthly. In order to continue to pay these life insurance premiums, Nancy and Dan would often forego paying back their mortgage, which in turn led them to more financial troubles. Basically, Nancy put them in a worse overall position, just so Dan could have an incredibly expensive policy. I'm going to skip a significant portion of her testimony, as her lawyer dwells on how she sold life insurance, Medicaid, and the ins and outs of her job, which are by all means completely unimportant to this case, especially as in her opening testimony and throughout, she tried to emphasize how the only evidence they needed that Nancy wasn't capable of killing her husband was love.
You're a romance writer.
Yes, I am.
What kind of stuff do you write?
Romantic suspense.
And we've heard from some of the other writers about writing devices or things that writers use to write their books. What kind of writing devices have you used in the past, or have you bought?
Bought or traded. For a while, I loaned some money to one of my employees, and in what I held in as their collateral was a pair of night vision goggles. I thought I got the better deal on that, real frankly, but he did come up with the money, and I had to give them back.
Did those night vision goggles make it into, or whatever we call them, night vision?
Oh, yeah.
Did they make it into one of your books?
Oh, yeah. And I learned a lot about night vision goggles.
What other kinds of things have you either purchased?
Well, we had expensive handcuffs. We had real handcuffs. We had fur-lined handcuffs. In fact, we had a couple of sets of those. We had, what else? We took a trip to Montana because I wanted to see some property that I thought would be a good location to set a story in that I never wrote. What else have I bought? Oh, man.
What about binoculars?
Oh, yeah. We have a really nice set of binoculars, which started out as a writing tool, and as I moved on, they became a tool we held on to.
Okay. Did you spend a lot of money on your writing?
Yes, I did.
Did that bother Dan?
Not at all.
Did Dan spend a little extra money on his cooking?
He did.
Did Dan have some really, really nice copper cookware?
So nice that when they were filming Grimm's TV show here, they called us and asked us if they could rent it from us. And we said, yes,
And was that something that Dan just wanted? He just wanted it. He just wanted it.
He wanted it, but we made a concession on how we bought it.
How'd you buy it?
Our birthdays are 9 days apart. And so every year for our birthdays, rather than buying each other a gift, we bought a copper pot.
Is that you built that collection of Dan's favorite cookware over a period of time?
Yes.
Can you describe just generally your writing process, your creative process?
I can. A lot of people plot more than I do. But what I do is I sit down and I like to have the story start to formulate. I like to know who all the characters are. I like to know what's known as GMC, goals, motivation, and conflict are. I like to work that through in my mind long before I put a pencil to a paper, or in my case, fingers to a keyboard. So I frequently have a large part of my story written in my mind before I ever sit down. And that means you spend a lot of time staring off into space. You spend a lot of time giving automatic answers to people who are thinking, you're not listening to a word I'm saying. You just kind of sit there and work it through.
Your Medicare practice you talked about driving all these different places.
Right.
Did that bother you?
Oh, not at all.
Why not?
Because it was meditative for me to drive, because most of the time I'm thinking about my plot. Almost inevitably, I have a notebook on the car open with a pen where I'm writing along and driving along and jotting things down.
I want to shift again and talk about firearms.
Okay.
In 2017, did the seed of a new story come to you?
It did.
And how did that come to be?
I read an article about a guy in California who bought a gun online, put it together, and killed his family. And I am amazed by this. I'm amazed you're able to do this. But I'm sitting there thinking, what if it was a woman who was afraid? What if it was a woman who bought the gun online or bought gun pieces online and put them together to protect herself? And so once I'd kind of flipped the story in my mind, I started building it. Now, the cool thing about the article, and there was other articles that followed it, was that it had links in it. And the links took me to various sites that showed me what was available.
Sometime in November of 2017, is that the article that you're talking about?
Yes.
And the links that you're talking about, do you remember what they were to?
One was to ghostguns.com and one was to Ghost Gunner, something. There was another similar title to it.
Okay. Did you go there, after reading that article, did you go there?
I did.
Before you read that article, did you know that guns could come in kits?
No.
So as you're thinking about this story in the beginning, how did you imagine it would come together?
What I really thought is, when I was thinking about it, was that you would buy pieces one place or another. Maybe gun shops had them. Maybe gun show people. Maybe you bought them online. But I was thinking there's got to be these pieces available where you could put a gun together. And then, lo and behold, there are kits. You don't have to go and shop everywhere.
Okay.
You just.
So was that a challenge in the beginning, trying to figure out? Well, let me back up. The story that you had,
Right.
How did the gun parts fit into the story arc?
Well, that gets to be really important. The way I was going to write the story was each month a piece would come to her in the mail, and so that would be the beginning. And as the gun built, so did the story arc. And so did her character arc. And what did you learn from putting a gun together? And how did it compare to your life? How does that solve some of your problems as you're working through them?
So it was piece by piece, chapter by chapter?
That's how.
But did you know what pieces to put into your story before you found out about gun kits?
No, but I figured that I would research it. I mean, in detail. People love the internet, but real frankly, I don't know a writer who doesn't have a library card. And I don't know a writer who doesn't go to the public library to look up what they want. Yes, it's online, but it's not necessarily correct online. It's just online.
Okay, so let's go back to the New York Times article
Okay.
that had the links in it. How did you use that article, or how did you use the links?
Ghost guns had more appeal to me, so I went back to that site 2 or 3 times. And I will say that sometimes my lack of totally planning can be a problem. But it was, they made it sound like it was really easy to put this gun together.
Was there a video on that site?
There was a link to a video.
Okay, and do you remember what the video was about?
It was about how easy it was to put this gun together. Yo ho ho, some guy whipped it out and got it together, and it was just nothing. I mean, it was harder than Legos, but not much, according to this video.
Okay, so you looked in November of 2017 at this site.
Right?
Did you buy a gun kit?
I did.
No, in November. Did you buy a gun kit?
Oh, I didn't buy a gun kit then. No,
Okay.
I went back and forth on buying the gun kit.
How many times do you think you went to that site before you bought a gun kit?
Oh,
If
I'll
you
bet
remember.
7 to 10.
Really?
Nancy went back to the site twice. The first time she went was in November, and the second time was on Christmas Eve 2017, when she purchased the gun kit. Based on her work, the defense saying she was using the gun kit website for research was a very obvious line of reasoning as to why she would have bought it. However, she never brought up the purchase to the police when they asked to see her weapon. She never spoke to anyone about the purchase, and likewise, there is no evidence that she was writing a book in which a gun kit was described or present. When asked to provide transcripts, Nancy said her writing method was so inward that she hadn't made any.
We saw a couple of different, there've been reference to a couple of different YouTubes or videos that you watched. And did you watch them with us? Do you remember seeing them real time?
Yeah, I had seen them before. It wasn't a total surprise to me.
Let's shift gears again. I want to talk about the week before Dan Brophy died.
Okay.
On the morning of May 26th
Yes,
of 2018, did Dan injure himself?
he did.
What did he do?
He had decided to take a shower downstairs so it wouldn't wake me up. And he took a shower, and he must have twisted or jerked this glass shower door we had, because it suddenly shattered into a million little pieces. And I didn't hear it shatter upstairs, but Dan came upstairs and he said, "We've got a problem." And his palms were bleeding, and apparently the bottom of his feet were bleeding. So he'd gotten out of the shower and managed to make it upstairs. He was doing a class. He wasn't doing a class. He was on a panel for a class at PCC that day. So I said, "We got to go to the hospital." So he has Kaiser insurance, and we went to a Kaiser hospital that was as close to PCC as we could get. And he ended up having stitches.
Many have theorized that this incident was an attempt on Dan's life that didn't work. How a shower door would suddenly break into a million pieces and come off without cause makes little to no sense.
Okay, so while Dan was getting cared for at the medical center,
Right.
what did you do?
I got in the car and drove over to PCC, and he'd given me a map as to where to go. And I went up to where the panel was, and I said, "I know Dan Brophy's supposed to be here right now, but he's having this medical procedure, and he'll be here as fast as he can." And they were all real relaxed, and they said, "That's great. When he gets here, he gets here." And so then I drove back over to Kaiser, picked Dan up, who was finished close to then, and we went over there, and he went to his panel.
What did you do while Dan was giving his presentation?
He was in what I would call the student union building, although I'm sure it has a different name. And so in the bottom floor, there's a cafeteria type place and a lounge where you can sit. And I was going through my emails. I had my computer with me, and I was going through my emails, and
Did you get an email that excited you?
I did.
What was
I
it?
did. In the Witches trilogy, I had gotten an email from an editor saying that they would like to look at it.
I'm
And
going to show you what, I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead.
Show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 209. Is that the email that you opened up?
That is, and I misspoke. I said it was from an editor, it was from an agent.
And I think I misspoke because I said it was the 26th and not the 25th.
Oh, okay. Yes. And so it's an email that tells me how to submit it because they would like to see it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Britton. I don't remember if this has been admitted, but if not, the defense would move to admit Exhibit 209.
Not sure either. Does the state object?
I think it's been pre-admitted, but we don't have an objection.
All right. It may have been, but in abundance of caution, 209 will be admitted if it hasn't already.
I confess to losing track. Over the next several days, over the next week, where was your head?
Oh, I'm trying to shape the story up to send it to this agent. It's a trilogy, and I'm finished with book 1, although it needs editing again. I'm finished with book 2, and I'm 60% through with book 3. So I have to make sure that I've got everything I need in book 1 that I'm going to need in book 3. I know that doesn't make sense, but you live and die by the first book. You can't suddenly introduce something in book 3 that because you need it if you didn't refer to it in book 1. So what I was doing was trying to finish my story, trying to get the first story together so I could send it to them, reading it through one more time to make sure there wasn't something stupid that stood out in it.
Was there something stupid that stood out in it?
Oh, there's always something stupid that stands out in it. That's, half of writing. You realize that after you've looked at this story 25 times, you misspelled the title, It's just one of those things that happens.
Was there a plot hole in, I think it was the third Witches book?
There was a huge plot hole, and it had to do with bending time and bending light. And I was frantically trying to figure out how to bend light in a tunnel and get my plot moving along. And there was several plot holes with it, but I was working on it night and day.
Okay.
I would say 97% of my time was spent on these characters.
Nancy is passionate when talking about her books. She clearly takes pride in what she does and the worlds she creates. But this is the most emotion she has shown thus far in the trial. When recounting moments of happiness and joy with her deceased spouse, she is reserved and aloof. But here, talking about an agent reaching out to her involving her books, she displays an incredible amount of joy and emotion, meaning she is capable of displaying that. She just doesn't when talking about Dan. Before going any further, I should also point out how Nancy's ability to recall entire conversations and periods of time has been impeccable so far in the trial. She has recalled things from over 20 years ago with relative ease, and will continue to do so for everything, sans the morning that Dan died. She goes on to state that she is slowly losing her memory with age, but in every other story she has told, she has been clear, focused, and able to remember small details.
When you say working on it night and day, were you working on it on your computer, working on it in your head, working on it in a combo of those?
All those above. I'm jotting notes places. I'm doing everything I can do to put this story together.
Were you completely immersed in that story?
Completely.
On June 1st, the day before Dan died, do you remember what you did?
Yes. We met for breakfast at,
Who's we?
Dan and I met for breakfast. He had gone down to school to drop off his carts. or at least I assume right now that that's where he'd gone down to do that. But he had gone down to school to do something. We met at the Six Corners Cafe, which is this little breakfast place that we like to go to that's had about 1,800 different names. But it's at the intersection of Sholesbury.
Beaverton Hillsdale Highway.
Yeah,
Let me help.
thank you.
What'd you do after that?
We drove back toward our house and stopped at St. Matthew's rummage sale. And there's a Lutheran church that has this great rummage sale every year, and we had talked about going to it, and we went.
Did you find anything at the rummage sale?
We did.
What was it?
Well, for Nathaniel, Dan had found a food dehydrator. And so I know that he had been in contact with Nathaniel, asking him if he wanted a food dehydrator before he bought it for him. And then I had found this kind of adorable little toy box that was a little beaten up. The wood was fine, the paint job needed serious work. And I thought, great, this is perfect. So I bought this little toy box because Nathaniel's wife was pregnant, and we had a new baby on the way, and he had another daughter who was. I thought this would work out really well for them, so I bought this toy box.
Now, is that something that you did?
Yes,
Took things like that and restored them or refinished
Yes.
them?
it's very. It's a great thing to do when you're a writer because you don't have to think about a lot of the stuff you do. I mean, when you're slapping gray paint on something because you need a primer coat, you can do that in the dark. Well, you can't, but you know what I'm saying? You don't have to pay attention to every brush stroke. It's very meditative. You can think about your story.
So when you got home, did you actually do that, start to begin?
I did.
That chest?
I did.
And were you still pretty immersed in your story?
Yes.
What were you thinking about when you went to sleep that night, or did you go to sleep?
Well, it was another night where I wasn't sleeping well, and part of that I blame on age, but part of it I blame because I am trying to get this story solved so I can move on, so I can get it sent off. Because if it's I don't want to be the slow one on the end of somebody who says, we'll publish your story for you. I want to be the one who's there and ready. So that was what I was doing, was, working through how to bend light.
You said that you had trouble sleeping. Did
Mm-hmm.
you ever get to sleep?
It was probably off and on.
Okay. Was there a time in the night that you got up to go to the bathroom?
Yes. Yes. Yes, but I think what you're referring to was I came to bed much later than Dan because I was working downstairs on some of this, and there was water on the floor, and I realized we had a leak under the sink, and I pulled up the wet towels and threw them in the sink and what have you.
Does Dan usually get up earlier than you?
Much.
And do you, does he get up the same time every day, or would you get?
I would say within a 30-minute time frame, he gets up the same time every day.
Okay.
Even on days he doesn't have class, he still gets up early.
Okay. June 2nd, though, he had class.
He had class.
And June 2nd, he had not just class, but a special class, live fire. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
What's the first thing you remember about the morning of June 2nd? Remember waking up?
I do. And I'm looking at Dan, who's leaning over the sink, looking at wet towels, going, what are these wet towels here for?
When you saw that, do you know whether Dan had already had a shower or whether he was planning to have a shower?
I don't know. I just don't know.
Nancy's demeanor when describing seeing her husband for the last time on the day he died is incredibly off-putting. At times, due to her quick response, she seems combative. This statement and emotion from her coming off so swiftly after she avidly recounted the ins and outs of the book she was working on is illuminating. It's clear that Dan ranks below her books in terms of joy they bring her. Even still, her lack of emotion goes against what the jury has been told. That said, the defense is going to go further in order to get Nancy to display the proper emotion about Dan. Let's see if it's successful.
What's the next thing you remember?
Him going downstairs with the wet towels.
Do you know where you were when you
I was
saw
still
that?
in bed.
Okay. What's the next thing you remember?
I leaped up out of bed and put on as minimal clothes as I could.
You say minimal clothes, what do you mean?
I mean, tights and flip-flops. I already had a nightshirt on. And
On most Saturdays, or most days when you don't have to go to work, when you don't have to go to a Medicare kiosk, how would you spend your mornings?
I'd go get coffee at Starbucks, and I'd come home and get back in bed and write.
How many mornings in the last several years did you go without a Starbucks?
Oh, not many at all. Dan and I used to joke that we were pretty sure we were building a retirement home for this guy.
So typically on a morning that you didn't have to be at work, you'd get up, you say you would leave your nightshirt on?
Yeah. You know, who's going to see me? I'm running to Starbucks, I'm going to the drive-in, I'm coming back home.
And then writing?
And then writing.
You remember putting pants on or tights on.
Right.
Do you remember anything else from that morning?
No. The next thing I remember from that morning is the phone ringing and it being Maxine.
And that's Maxine Borcherding?
Yes, it is.
We heard from her earlier in the trial.
We did.
And where were you when Maxine called?
I was in bed writing.
What did Maxine have to say?
She said, "Do you know what's going on at the school?" And I said, "No, what?" And she told me about the fact that Potluck in the Park had called her and there was some sort of police interaction going on down there. And so I said, "Let me call Dan, I'll call you back." So I called Dan and he didn't answer, and I texted him and I called Maxine back and said, "I'm not getting an answer."
When Maxine called you, did she talk to you about some sort of a news report?
She did. She said, it's on the news. And I said, okay. So the whole time I'm dialing Dan, I'm flipping channels on the news to see if I can see anything at all that tells me what's going on.
Okay, so you talked to Maxine and then you try to reach Dan?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how you tried to reach him?
I know I called him, and I know he
Ask you
didn't.
this, why didn't you
Oh.
leave a message if you called him?
I may have, but I don't think I did, because if he doesn't answer his phone, he's going to see it's me and he'll call back. And I texted him, because usually he's better at texting, particularly when he's got a class going on, and he didn't respond. And I talked to Maxine and said, "I don't think I'm going down there," because you know how you can hear your husband laughing in your mind where you're saying, "Yes, I came down to rescue you," and he's going, "What are you thinking? If it had been a problem, I would have called you. You know this." And so I'm hearing this in the back of my mind, but at the same time, I'm worried that this text message is going unanswered and there's police there. You know, this is not looking good. So,
At some point before you called your mother-in-law, did you have any information about any more details about what was going on at the school?
somewhere in there, I had learned there was shooting. At that point, I wasn't sure that I knew somebody was dead or even somebody was injured, but I knew there'd been a shooting.
What did you do then?
I called my mother-in-law. And, Karen Brophy is a sweet, sweet woman, but she also has a core of steel. And I have looked to her to be the mother that I lost because
What did you say to Karen Brophy?
I said, I don't even know why I'm calling you. It's just I wanted somebody to worry besides me. And Karen came back and said, I'm sending Jack down. You go down and I will pray. And I thought, okay, that's the plan. We'll do that. And when we hung up, I immediately put on clothes and went down.
Okay. Now, I know there's been some confusion about this. Did Karen Brophy have to call you another time to prod you to go?
No, she did call me another time. She and I agreed there were 3 phone calls. She called me, the next time she called me, I was standing in front of the police. And she calls me and says, what's happening?
This is untrue. Karen had testified that morning of June 2nd, after Nancy had called her to inform her that there was some sort of incident at the Institute. Nancy stated she didn't want to go because it was probably nothing. Karen agreed, not knowing the details of what was going on. Their second phone call was Nancy relaying to Karen that there was a shooting, but she didn't want to go because she would be in the way. Karen prodded her to go, and it was only after Karen stated that she needed to be there that Nancy left her house. It also should be noted that Nancy told her mother-in-law that Dan had been the one shot prior to the police telling her, something that could only be true if she had shot him herself. Also, Nancy stating here that she went to get Starbucks that morning after Dan left, but then immediately went back to sleep and doesn't remember anything before she got the call, is her trying to make up for the fact that her car was seen in the area. She gave a statement to the police the same day stating that she had not left the house after Dan left, which is in direct contrast with the news story she is peddling.
Okay, so I want to back up a little bit.
Sure.
You decide to go down to OCI.
I do.
Did you have to change your clothes? What'd you do?
Well, I'm still in a nightshirt. So yeah, I had to put on clothes. I may run to Starbucks in a nightshirt, but most of the time I'm not running around downtown in pajamas. And so I put on clothes and I didn't take a shower. And I know that because I had paint on my hands. And I leaped into the car and hitting the buttons as I'm driving, trying to find more news reports. Now, I don't know exactly when I figured it out, but I knew by the time I got to school there'd been a fatality.
Describe, just kind of help the jury understand what you're feeling, what's going on in your head as you're driving to OCI.
I'm feeling, that feeling in your throat where you can't swallow and you think you want to throw up and you aren't throwing up. And I realized that my hands hurt and I looked down and I realized my hands hurt because I'm white knuckling the steering wheel with one hand as I'm pushing the buttons with the other. And I'm feeling really mixed. If I get down there and it's nothing, Dan is going to laugh. But that's the worst that can happen. The best that can happen, I can get down there and everything will be okay and everything will be fine and what have you. But the fact that I still have an unanswered text from Dan, the fact I have an unanswered phone call from Dan, and there's police everywhere down there and there's been a fatality, I am not thinking things look good. I am working myself up into a state without knowing anything. And I can also hear Dan in the background going, well, you know what we say, it's never too early to panic. And I know that I'm doing that, but I can't seem to stop myself from panicking at this point.
When you got to OCI, what did you do?
I kind of found a place to park. I kind of invented my own little parking spot. And on Jefferson, at the corner, there's yellow police tape all the way across. So when you get down to Jefferson, you absolutely have to turn on, what street am I on? 17th. You absolutely have to turn on 17th because the police aren't letting you through. And there's a cop car right in the middle of the yellow tape. And I walk over to the cop car and I said, I'm Nancy Brophy. And he didn't even ask what I want. He said, I want you to wait over there. And I said, okay. And I went over to where he pointed. And he said, somebody will be out to see you.
What
And
could
so
you see from where you were waiting?
I could see lots of people. There was lots of people milling around. But the most important people I could see milling around were the people Dan worked with. Woody Bailey, Brian Wilkie. All these people are standing around and nobody,
Can you find Dan?
no. And he would have been with those guys. These guys were his friends. And I know he would have been there and he wasn't there, and that worried me a lot. Just a minute. Hold on. Anyway, this worries me that I'm seeing all these people who know him. It worries me that every time I look at the people who know me, they're not looking at me, they're looking down, they're looking away. And I'm thinking, this isn't good.
What happens then?
The police come, this policewoman and a couple other people come and they get me, and we walk half a building and they're saying, stand over here so you're out of the light of the media. And I said, okay. And I'm crying. And a policewoman who, if you asked me later, I would have told you was 100 pounds, but it turns out she wasn't, reaches out and hugs me. And that's the exact moment when I knew. Just a minute. When I knew Dan was dead.
Throughout her testimony, Nancy's voice goes from shaky to normal to shaky again. However, in most displays of emotion like Nancy is in the midst of, being able to talk and gain composure is much more time-consuming and difficult. Nancy's ability to go from deeply upset to matter-of-fact vocally stands out as being inauthentic and forced. Pay attention to the swiftness in which Nancy will go from crying to fine in the next couple clips.
And I knew it because I don't know how often you've been hugged by the police, but I don't get hugged by the police all that often. And so this is not a good sign. And she's hugging me and I'm crying. And apparently, according to the tips woman, wailing, which didn't really horribly surprise me when she said that. And then two detectives walk over and said, we'd like to talk to you, and led me to the van. We're not even 5 feet from the van when Karen Brophy calls me again.
What do you say to Karen?
She said, what do you know? And I said, it's Dan. And Karen starts to wail. And I want to wail, but I'm dealing with the police who are standing right in front of me. And I have to tap everything down, and said, I'll talk to you later when I'm talking to the police now. And she said, okay. So we hung up the phone. It was a very short call. And so
Did you go into the van, the police van?
we got into the van.
Who's inside the van besides you?
Well, the van has a table in the back, and so I've slid around to where I'm kind of at the very back. Detective Posey sits next to me, and Detective Merrill sits across from me, and that's who's in the van. You know,
What's going on in your head while you're sitting there?
I'm trying to pull myself together because, you know, these guys want to talk to me and they're the police, and I'm okay with that. But everything in my mind is screaming, Dan is dead. And I'm really having to struggle to get that out of the way so I can answer questions semi-intelligently when they ask me, you know. And that's, I mean, once I went through menopause, my hands were never cold. And what I can remember is my hands were ice cold. And my heart was thumping, 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 thumping. And I'm probably sniveling just like I am now. And all I really, really, really wanted was for them to tell me it was a mistake. This isn't, you're wrong. This is wrong. Yes, he's hurt, but he's not hurt bad. He's certainly not dead.
Did you try your best to answer their questions?
I tried. I tried. I tried to pull it together enough that I could sound like I knew what I was doing. But most of the questions that they were asking, I wasn't thinking about the questions. I was thinking about what is his routine? Okay, here's his routine. You know, this is what he would do. I'm sure this morning was the same, except, you know,
Whose morning do you think they wanted to know about that day? When you're talking to Detectives Posey and Merrill, whose morning did you think they were focused on? Yours or Dan's?
oh, Dan's. I think, I don't think they gave a rip about what I was doing.
Is that what you were trying to help them to understand? What Dan
Yes.
was probably doing?
Yes, so that maybe some weird little thing had happened and they would spot it right away and say, aha, you know.
They asked you whether Dan owned guns and whether he might have brought a gun to school. Do you remember that?
I do. I do.
What did you think? Did you get a sense of why they wanted to know that? Or did they tell you why they wanted to know that? Why they wanted to know if Dan brought a gun to school?
Well, I assumed, and perhaps this is just assuming, when we're talking about a shooting, there are guns involved,
Okay.
you know.
So when they asked you about Dan's gun ownership, or did you think they were asking you about a gun kit?
No,
Did you think they were asking you about gun parts?
no.
What did you think they were asking about?
I thought they were asking about the Glock I thought was sitting on our closet shelf that hadn't been messed with much since we bought it.
I don't want to get too far into your politics, but is it fair to say that they are somewhat left of center?
I think that would be fair, yes.
Okay. And for many years, would you have told people that you are anti-gun?
I would have. My first husband was a police officer, and he had a gun collection. And we negotiated when we were married that he, in fact, would not have the gun collection in the house. I felt that strongly.
Do you have good friends and family members who are adamantly anti-gun?
I do.
Would you say that before June 2nd that would you say you were still anti-gun?
No, I would say my thinking had shifted on that over the last 2 years. That the country had gone crazy. And, you know, we were having all these school shootings, and that didn't happen in the last 2 years. That's been over the last, 10? But I was less anti-gun than I had been in the past. But I was more worried about our safety than I ever had been.
On June 2nd, after you learned that your husband had been killed with a gun, how did you feel about your decision to buy a gun?
Well, in the lighter moments, I thought it was karma kicking me in the ass. But in the heavier moments, I thought, we own a gun and it didn't protect us. We bought a gun to protect us and it didn't do its job. Sorry.
You told the police that.
Wait, I need to wait just a
Sure,
minute.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm me. Okay.
You told the police that you thought the gun was ugly.
I think at that moment, I'd never hated that gun more than I ever did in that
You told the police that you were embarrassed to have bought the gun.
I was.
You told the police that you decided you really weren't gun people.
Yes.
Were you embarrassed at that point by gun ownership?
Yes, I was. I was embarrassed that we had a gun and it was at home and Dan was dead, you know. And I think embarrassed is only one of the emotions I was feeling at that moment.
After you talked with the detectives, did they ask you to speak with a young woman?
They did.
And did she testify in this case? I don't remember.
She did.
And at the end of that conversation, did she give you a little booklet?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 237.1. It'll show up on your screen there.
Yes.
And what was that inside the booklet that she gave you?
Yes. But I didn't open the booklet when I got home. Sue Lute, Darla Lukenbaugh, and Linda Smith had come over, and one of them opened the booklet and said, "Hey, there's really good information in here." And that was when I looked at it and thought, these are things I need to do.
Among the things that you need to do, did they tell you to notify insurance companies?
They did.
And can you scroll down and look at all the things that they tell you to do? No, you can't. He has to do it for
I
you.
know,
Ms.
I know,
Brophy.
but I'm seeing one of those comments right here.
Okay. Is it too little now to see, or are you good?
Okay, so it says notify insurance companies, including automobile insurance, of immediate cancellation and request any refund. Carefully check all life and casualty insurance and death benefits, including Social Security, credit union, trade union, fraternal, military, etc. And there's some place in here, or maybe it was in another sheet, but that it says, get your insurance policies together, get your will together.
Okay. Sometime in the next couple of days, did you try to find the will?
Yes.
Did you
Yes.
find it?
I had, yeah, where I thought it was, it wasn't. Karen Brophy came over several times in those periods, and at one point or another, she and my niece Rachel, they said, "What do you think you need to do?" And I said, "I need to find the wills." And we went through, my upstairs bedroom was an attic, and so it's long, but it has these cute little cubby holes off of it that are storage for stuff that, in our case, we stored Christmas ornaments in that and other things along those lines. But we went through everything in there because there was also boxes we hadn't unpacked from the fire we'd had 10 years ago. And I said, I haven't seen this will in a while. And so we're going through these boxes trying to see if I'd tucked the wills in there.
Did you begin to pull together all the life insurance policies?
Life insurance policies were easier for me to pull together because I had a file cabinet that had life insurance in it, so it wasn't that hard for me to pull them together.
Based on your experience, what was your sense of how quickly a life insurance company would pay a death claim in the case of murder?
I'd never had a client who had been murdered. I had no idea. But when I talked to the insurance agents, the insurance companies, because you call them and you say, I need to set up a claim, and they ask you questions, I immediately began to realize it was going to be, this was not going to be a quick payout by any wild stretch of the imagination. That, they said, well, send us this, this, and this. And so I'm taking notes and saying, okay. But part of it was stuff that, I didn't have even yet, Did
one of the insurance companies tell you that you should call the police to get a letter of exoneration?
They did. That was Forrester's.
Before you made that call, did you talk to your sister?
I did.
Is your sister a lawyer?
Yes, she is.
And when you told her that's what the insurance company had told you to do, what was her reaction?
It was strictly humor. She said, yeah, that'll be happening. That's kind of sarcasm that runs in our family anyway, where they were saying, and Holly and her law partner had dealt with a lot, because they're probate lawyers, had dealt with a lot of these things. And I relied very heavily on her in those days as I was quizzing her on what I needed to do and what have you.
We've heard the call that you made to Detective Posey
Yes?
a couple, and I don't remember now exactly when the call was made, but it was soon after Dan's murder, is that
It
right?
was.
I want to move forward again.
Okay.
After you were, remember when you were arrested?
Mm-hmm.
When was that?
September the 5th, I had gone to a United Healthcare meeting, and I had come home, and I needed to fax. I was having, what was it? I was having a printer problem at that point, and I needed to fax something to someone, and so I'd driven to Office Depot and faxed it and come home.
And you were greeted by police?
I pulled in my driveway, and a car I didn't know pulled in right behind me.
Pretty soon you were standing in the middle of your lawn in handcuffs?
Pretty soon, that's exactly how that happened.
At some point, soon after you were arrested, the police described to you the evidence that they had, or at least some of the evidence that they had.
Yeah, I sat in a holding cell for, I'm going to say, well, I got arrested 2:00. I'm going to say it was between 6 and 8 o'clock. They finally.
I want to just ask you some specific questions.
Okay.
Though. Did you learn that the police had video, or were you told that the police had video of you driving in Beaverton?
Yes.
Did that surprise you?
No, I could believe that.
Okay. Did they tell you that they had video of you near the murder scene?
Yes.
Did you believe that was true?
Not for 1 second. I thought, they're making this up. This isn't true.
With how casually Nancy is talking about this and responding to questions, it's surprising that she was crying less than 10 minutes ago. Apart from that, Nancy's clear belief in her ability to sway the jury from damning evidence against her is on full display. She is confident that the evidence of her in the area before and after Dan's murder, her trying to cash in the insurance within the span of 2 days, and her buying a gun kit that she kept from the police has been appropriately explained away. In her mind, she is about to exonerate herself entirely.
So shortly after your arrest, were you represented by a lawyer named Katie Dunn?
I was.
And at some point, did Ms. Dunn come to show you some of the evidence in the case?
She did.
And did she show you a photograph that kind of shook you to your core?
She showed me a photograph of what looked like my van and what looked like me in it and what looked like me in clothes I recognized.
What do you mean
was
clothes you recognize?
that night shirt that we've talked about, the nubbly black one with the white lace applique. And I was obviously somewhere near the school. I can't remember if the backdrop was Bellagio's or whatever. I wasn't that involved with the backdrop, but I can tell you it looked like me. I can tell you that I was, oh man, I was frightened to death. You know, you know what they say? They say old age isn't for sissies. So what happens is I turn 65 as I'm starting to lose my eyesight. Then I'm starting to lose my hearing. I'm looking at this and thinking, oh man, I'm now losing my mind, because that's what you think. You think, how can this have happened and me not remember this? How am I sitting here in a vehicle and have absolutely no memory of how I got there? And they're saying it happened at this time, and it's video stamped. It's not like it's, trust us, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's this time. It was not that. It was this picture, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not even sure what I was thinking, to be perfectly honest, because even now, as I think about it, my mind kind of goes blank with the horror of it, you know?
Are you familiar with that Goose Hollow neighborhood?
Oh, very much so.
How familiar?
Probably the entire time I have spent in Portland has been associated with the Goose Hollow neighborhood. I went to school there. I worked at 19th and Flanders for over 10 years. Dan taught there. Of all the neighborhoods that I'm comfortable with and that I feel I know where I am all the time there, that would be Goose Hollow.
And have you written, kind of used the Goose Hollow place as a writing place?
I have.
What's attractive about that neighborhood for writing?
Well, one, it's shady. Two, even though I know it is a home for a great many homeless people, and I know it is a neighborhood that has a lot of drug people associated with it, I still felt safe there. I had been there enough that it was just comfortable. It was more comfortable, in fact, than the neighborhood I'd lived in for 20 years.
When you would come into Portland from Beaverton,
Yes.
how would you come into the city?
I'd leap on 217, leap on 26, get off at, what's that exit called? The one right after the zoo that takes you right down, right down on Jefferson.
Okay. Is that typically how you enter the city?
Yes.
Later, after Ms. Dunn had shown you this photograph,
Yes.
did you watch videotape surveillance of the footage taken near OCI?
Yes.
Did any of that video spark any memory of what you might have been doing on June 2nd?
Yes. So I am seeing myself sitting at this park writing. And the reason why this sticks out is it was a parking lot and it was empty, but there was a white van there. And there was some guy who kept walking back and forth, walking back and forth, walking back and forth. And I think he was working on the van, but it was just enough to throw me out of where I was that I moved. I said, no, I can't pay attention to him and think about what I need to think about. And so I moved the car.
So in this memory,
Yes.
is it a real memory? I mean, this is a real memory, right?
Yes.
What are you doing when you're in the car?
I have a pad of paper. I'm jotting things down. And it's a pleasant day. I can remember that because it wasn't raining. And it's shady. It's, I'm just sitting here pulling it together, but that's when I can remember is that it would be a place I would have felt very comfortable writing. And so I'm sure that is a true memory.
Do you know whether, you said you had written in that neighborhood before?
I have.
And you're saying that this video triggers this memory.
Yes.
Do you know whether this event that you're describing occurred on June 2nd?
No.
Do you know that it didn't?
No.
There was testimony from your cousin
Yes.
about coming to visit you in August
Mm-hmm.
and having you get lost while driving home from the airport,
Yes.
and lost again when you were driving to the forestry center.
Yes.
How many times had you been to the forestry center?
Hundreds. We did a lot of catering there. The zoo was right there. We'd taken our granddaughter to the zoo. We'd gone to the zoo. The mushroom show is held at the forestry center every year. I've been there hundreds and hundreds of times.
Were those 2 times that she described the only times that you got lost?
Oh, no. I spent a lot of that whole summer pulling up my GPS and trying to figure out where I was and where I was going. You know,
Can you just describe, Your Honor, are you about to, you're looking at the clock?
I am, but I think you've got time for a question and answer, so let's
Okay.
go ahead.
Can you describe generally, just describe for the jury, the days, weeks, and months after June 2nd? What's going on in you?
okay. Dan dies. And I'm walking around in a fog, and I have people who are coming to see me all the time and are really working hard on taking care of me. Making sure that I'm eating right, making sure that I'm taken care of. And just about the time that I think I can probably start coming back to life, my brother dies. And so it's like another body blow. So now, because I was left as the executor of the estate, I'm going back and forth to Texas, functioning. I'm putting on my, I'm okay face. Oh, I'm okay. And my smile that is neither sincere nor humorous or anything. And I'm getting through my days. Step, step, breathe, step, step. And you know what they tell you? They tell you that when you grieve, you go through these 5 steps, and we've all read this. We know this. We know the 5 steps. It doesn't work like that. They don't tell you that the steps, that it's not a little smooth transition. Okay, now I'm in this step. No. I could go through all 5 steps in the morning and still be ready for the afternoon. I am in a fog. I have no idea what's going on 90% of the time. And fortunately, I have people who are just kind of stepping into my life and helping me out. My family sent Susan to me, and I wanted Susan to come. It wasn't that. But they keep her with me until they think I should be able to function. And I'm probably alone for a week then when my cousin Janet comes. And all it is my family saying, we're with you. We know you're suffering, and we're just here to help if we can. Then my Uncle Ed dies. And when Janet described him as the Mr. Rogers of our family, he truly, truly was. He was probably one of the nicest guys in the whole wide world. And then I get arrested, and that's my summer. And I'm thinking, nowhere in there have I had time to grieve for any of the losses, much less Dan's. And I'm in a fog, and I go into, the one thing you can tell you when you get arrested, there are 2 things that never happen. It is never quiet, and it is never dark. And it's been 4 years since Dan died, and I know one thing. I know I still haven't grieved appropriately for him. I know. I know in 4 years, I should be in a different place than I am. And I think a lot of that is because of that summer and how it happened.
Again, Nancy emphasizes her life and her feelings when talking about Dan and his death. It's all in regards to how it affected her, rather than how it's a tragedy and how Dan deserved to live. Her going on to state that she was never able to properly grieve also flies in the face of how matter-of-fact she was when she talked about his life earlier. If she stated she had grieved and was moving on, it would have appeared that she could talk about those moments without emotion because she had coped with the loss. But here, it just appears that she only hurts when talking about how hard her life has been, instead of focusing on Dan's demise. Again, Nancy's memory about the summer after Dan's death is impeccable. She recalls who was with her and when, as well as what they did. But the worst day of her life, when her husband was killed in a random act of violence, she has borderline no memory of.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. People have testified in this court that you didn't display the appropriate grief.
Yeah.
How do you feel about public grief?
I hate public grief. I don't even like crying when I'm alone. I think crying is so worthless. It doesn't accomplish anything. I think this is In fact, I'm sitting here now like I'm a watering pot gone astray. It's just embarrassing. You know, how do I feel about crying? I hate crying, but I really hate public crying. And when somebody dies near you, there is a real thin line between sympathy and pity. And man, when you think you're starting to cross over that line, you really, really just want to be away from everybody. My whole plan after Dan died, I had a plan. It was to go upstairs, pull the covers over my head, and wake up in 2050. It wasn't to have to deal with Mark's funeral and Uncle Ed's passing and, all this stuff. So people tell you all the time, they say, oh, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. You'll work through it yourself. And then they're sitting there with a check mark list saying, oh, no, she's not showing enough emotion. There's no right or wrong answer here because, well, there is a wrong answer, and it's always a wrong answer no matter what you're doing. So they may feel that way. I certainly feel I didn't grieve enough, and I still feel that way. But if people think looking at me, I wasn't sad or wasn't brokenhearted over losing my husband, they would have been wrong.
If people thought I wasn't sad over losing my husband, they would have been wrong. It's a bad time to mix up tenses. For Nancy, she wasn't sad about Dan because she had planned his demise. But when she brings up her uncle's death and other deaths that happened shortly thereafter, her emotions intensify throughout, and it does appear genuine.
After Dan died, you prepared to get that house sold quickly, is that
I
right?
did.
Why is that?
Oh, okay, so I've got all these deaths going on around me, and then I get the cheery little news that I'm not on the note, and Wells Fargo can, whether I'm behind on the payments or not, does not matter. They can foreclose on the property because the note holder is dead. And I'm thinking, oh man, so now I get to add this to my list of stuff. If it was up to me, we could have waited another year to have sold the house, except now I've got Wells Fargo breathing down my neck. And he said, be careful, don't let Wells Fargo know. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean I don't talk to Social Security? Dan wasn't on Social Security, so that wasn't a big issue. But, do they not read the papers? Do they not say, look at this, a guy died? It wasn't like it was a big secret, but
Were you in a hurry?
I felt more like in a hurry once I heard that news. I felt like I didn't have any leeway.
Did James, Danny, and Tamara Alva pick up the pace of trying to get that backyard cleaned up?
They did, but it was also summer and it dried up enough that they could get the big equipment back there.
And did you have friends coming over to help you get things cleared out?
Oh man, everybody helped. I mean, honestly, you really find out who loves you when something terrible happens, because people came over and said, I'm here, what can I do? And the people who didn't say that, when they saw me, said, if you need anything, call me. Friends organized other friends, and they would come over in groups to help me pack. Susan called her boyfriend and told him to come up. It was like, like they were trying to make up for how much Dan had meant to me, because they knew how heavily I relied on him.
Part of cleaning out the house was to clean out a lot of Dan's stuff.
It was.
We heard about for example, we heard about the downstairs, just filled with canned goods.
I gave Jack half-gallon containers. I gave him 48 half-gallon containers of fabulous stock so that he could use it at the homeless shelter. And it was duck stock, and it was chicken stock, and it was turkey stock, and it was beef stock. It was the kind of thing that if you were a foodie, you would have said, I'm moving in here. We had a stove where if you were a foodie, you would have said, I'm moving in here. You know, our house was dedicated to Dan's cooking in lots of ways.
And all those canned goods, did you try to find homes for that?
I did. Some of them, I thought people were going to start closing their windows when they saw me coming because, oh no, they'll give us any more stuff, you know.
What about some of the other things like cooking things and utensils and things like that? His multiples of tongs and.
We had enough friends who were foodies or cookers or chefs or what have you, that a lot of that stuff I was able to give to people who I knew would use it. But some stuff, you know, we gave to Nathaniel specifically because we knew that he also loved to cook and there would be things he would like.
Who's we?
Dan and me. I mean, he's not here. I'm sorry.
How many different people do you think were in and out of your house helping you move things around? Or pack things up or throw things away? Both friends and people who were hired, how many do you think came in and out?
Probably somewhere between 25 and 35.
Did you know them all?
Yes, I did actually.
Well, what about the people like that, oh, my brother's guy?
No, yeah. Okay, I didn't know those people, but that was, and you're right, I didn't know them all. I didn't know the guys that Tanya sent over. I didn't know the All My Brothers guys. But they came for a specific piece of what I wanted, what I needed to have done. And for the most part, not Tanya's friends, but for the most part, they were paid for it. You know,
Did you watch every box get packed?
oh, Lord, no. Most of the time they said, just leave, just, you know, go find something else to do and let us do this. You know, we would, at the end of a day, where I felt like I had done nothing, which was probably pretty good, accurate statement of what I'd done, we would have 20 boxes that we'd need to take to storage, you know. And Susan organized everything. I mean, she has some strong organizational skills. And when the police got there, they must have just groaned when they saw how many boxes were in there. Because a lot of the stuff I couldn't get rid of, you know.
The police found the gun kit in storage.
They did.
Marked GK.
I packed that box.
You gave them the gun, the Glock 17.
I did.
That had the little zip tied through it.
Right?
But there isn't a slide in evidence. Do you know where that slide is?
On the day I was arrested, if they had asked me, I would have said it was either in storage or in the house. I hadn't seen it for a while, but I had no idea where it was.
You know where it is now?
No, I would have thought that somebody would have found it.
The one portion of the gun kit that would have exonerated her if she could have presented it, that being the slide, somehow went missing. Nancy tries to play this off as having been a circumstance caused by the 35 people who helped her pack up her life and move after Dan's death. But given that the rest of the gun kit, as well as the gun she bought, weren't touched, it's clear that she got rid of the sole piece of evidence that would show she had fired the gun. The rest of the testimony by her defense team is fairly inconsequential, but I will leave a link to it in the description if you would like to watch. They don't disparage or deny any of the evidence, but instead try to paint a relatively innocent picture of all the evidence. The millions of dollars in life insurance, Nancy hadn't taken those out on Dan because she wanted the money. She took it out as a kind of loan, which only put her and Dan further into debt and at risk for defaulting on their mortgage. The video of her car in the area of the shooting, both directly before and after, she went to get Starbucks and simply didn't remember. She also might have sat in the car at a park writing, then went home, went back to sleep, and woke up. The gun kit? She just got it so she could write about it for the next romance novel. She has no evidence of this in the form of rough drafts she had worked on prior to his death, but she had no use for it otherwise. Her cellmate coming forward and stating that she talked to her about shooting her husband in the back and the chest? Completely not addressed, as if it never happened. While we won't go over the full 6+ hours of cross-examination that occurred, it's important to see how Nancy's mask slips between someone she is comfortable with, who she has practiced her story to, versus someone who is directly challenging her. Again, Nancy believes that everything she has said thus far makes logical sense. She cannot have someone question her statements where she says she has memory issues, while simultaneously recollecting things from 20 years ago with perfect clarity, lest her entire testimony falls through. The cross-examination is extremely important, as she would need to make sense of some of the most nonsensical parts of her story, while still coming across as sympathetic and likable. But like Diane Downs and Tony Tote, her ego being challenged does not allow this to happen. Let's watch.
Judge. Good afternoon, Ms. Brophy.
Good afternoon.
Back in 2018, did you carry a purse?
No,
Carry a wallet?
no,
How did you carry your critical pieces of information, like an ID and stuff like that?
in my bra. I know that's weird, but so much of what I did was not aided by having a purse. So I had my phone in my bra. If I needed a driver's license or a card, and I rarely had cash. So in my bra.
Nancy's tone and her way of speaking has completely shifted. Prior, she would expand endlessly on certain subject matter, but her direct answers come across as argumentative and aggressive towards the prosecution before they have even really started.
And you wrote this letter to Dan in 2015.
I did.
That's been referred to a couple of times. After you wrote that, did you print it?
Yes.
And what did you do with it?
I put it in an envelope, and it was a purple folder, and I put it on a desk that we shared. So if something happened and he came back and had to go through the desk, he would see it first thing.
And that was the only thing in that envelope?
Yes? Oh, no, there was probably copies of the policies in the envelope in addition, I not only did I give him the information, I gave him the policies themselves.
And how would Dan know to have looked for that letter after, if you were to pass during that time?
I figured sooner or later he would go to our desk, is what I figured. That sooner or later he would be looking for something and there would be the photo with Dan on it and he would see it and read it and realize what he had.
Okay. So you put this letter and some policies perhaps and put them in this envelope, put it on the desk. And,
Folder.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Purple, you said envelope. It's a purple folder.
Okay. Purple folder.
Nancy herself called this folder an envelope less than 2 minutes before.
I put it in an envelope.
However, she corrects the prosecution as a way to subconsciously assert dominance in this situation. She is marking her territory, so to speak, and asserting that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Her smirk towards him does not align with the grieving widow she was portraying just minutes before, and in this instance, she believes that she can outsmart the prosecution and get away with murder. She will continue this behavior, unaware of how tonally inconsistent it is to what she was trying to portray.
And did you write his name on it?
Yes,
Okay.
in big letters.
Did you say something about a picture? Did you not say that?
I don't think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. So it says Dan on it.
Right?
Okay. And is this a folder that closes, or like, is there a snap on it or anything like that?
Can you hold up that orange folder? Thank you. It's a folder just like this. It's a folder.
Okay.
And it's purple.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
And so when you got back from your surgery,
Right?
was that folder still there,
It was.
right where you left it?
Yes?
Was there any indication to you that Dan had ever read that letter?
No. As far as I can tell, Dan never read it.
In that letter, you direct Dan to keep paying on the Americo policy because he'll get the premiums back in 9 years.
Yes, my math skills were a little iffy there.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Is your math wrong, or did you just have a typo, or what?
I'm going to tell you my math was either wrong or I had a typo. I had no idea, but it is wrong. You're absolutely right.
Because it's actually 19 years, right?
No, by that time it was probably more like 15 years.
So probably not a typo then, because the 9 is. But he had about 15 more years that he needed to pay on.
Did.
Okay. And you knew that. You knew that about the policy.
I did.
And you also knew that if you were to get to that point where you were collecting, or I'm sorry, had the ability to collect the premiums back, you knew then that if you were to take that money back, that you'd actually have to give up the policy.
Nope.
You didn't know that?
No. I could continue paying on the policy for Dan, but I could take the money out of it.
Didn't your insurance expert testify? Did you hear him testify and say that if you were to take that money out of that policy, that you would have had to forfeit the policy?
If they said that, I didn't understand, but I can tell you this. They have a schedule in the policy that shows what happens if you have this money. For example, if Dan died when he was 78, we didn't get 100,000 back, we got 167,000 back. But if we took the 67,000 out of it, we can continue paying for the policy. Now, that's not to say it was a 20-year term. That's not to say they might not raise the premium on it, but we could continue paying for it.
You disagree with your insurance expert?
I disagree with that aspect if that's what they really said.
Okay. And this, you said, was part of a bigger retirement plan, correct?
It was?
Correct. And so, this idea that, would you agree it's pretty risky?
What is risky?
Well, the one, you have to live to be able to collect on the policy, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay. And if you don't want to give up that well, I guess you disagree with that notion that you have to give up the policy. So I guess I'll just ask you this. You agree that you paid 3 to 6 times
Yes.
more for that policy than what you could have bought a similar coverage for?
I do.
And so,
Purposefully.
and just asking, did you guys have the thought that, well, maybe we should put this money away and actually be able to access it whenever we need it, instead of risking not getting it at all? Did you have that discussion?
Okay, I need to break that down and answer your question.
Yeah,
in
let me ask you in a
segments.
series of questions.
Okay.
Did you have the discussion with Dan that, well, maybe we don't want to spend all this money on a policy right now. Let's pay for a cheaper policy, but let's put some money away, like as if we were putting it in to the life insurance.
We would have had that discussion if either one of us were savers. But at that point, I knew I was not a saver. So I understand this about myself. Part of the reason why I have forced savings policies is because I know I'm not a saver. And if I can put this money away where I can't get to it, we will have it later on when we need it. If we're just doing a savings account or we're investing in the stock market,
Sure.
I'm not good like that.
But you agree that you treated the forester's policy that also had this savings component. It's forced savings, but you were just taking the money.
I took the money out when we needed it because it was there, because why we had it was for A, retirement, but B, emergencies, and this qualified as an emergency.
Not much of a forced savings, though, if you were just taking the money out, right?
That is true.
And
But-
in fact, you didn't pay that back either.
No, we did not, but part of our plan was to pay that back. When we sold the house, we were going to overfund the policy.
Sure. And in that Dearest Dan letter, you also told Dan, or you were writing at least, that he should try to collect on a Conseco policy, even though you knew that it wasn't really enforced, correct?
No, it had been, let me go back and explain that a little differently. It had been Universal Life. Conseco had an iffy reputation at that point. We had decided to let that go But when you have universal light that you can't borrow against, it continues on because the money you have in there continues to pay the policy. So I knew it was being paid, even though I had stopped paying on it. I knew there was a real good possibility it was in force.
I see. You just weren't really sure.
Right.
Okay. And when you, 4 days after Dan's murder, you called Detective Posey, is that right?
No. Dan died Saturday morning. I called Monday afternoon.
That's when you called Detective Posey regarding the insurance policy?
Right.
And that was,
I had done what they had told me. I'd called insurance companies and started the claim, and that's when we had a conversation, and then I called Holly, and then I called Detective Posey.
we'll break that down. I just want to.
Sorry.
You're saying that was on the 4th?
I think so. I think it was that Monday.
And if your call records show that it was actually the 6th?
It could have been.
Okay.
You know, the call records are going to be more accurate at this point than I am.
And also on the 6th, you actually, well, during that phone call with Detective Posey, you only disclosed a $40,000 policy.
Yes, but he
Remember
didn't
that.
ask me about anything else.
I understand. I don't think he even asked you about that. Isn't it true that you actually just offered that it was
That's
just a
true.
$40,000 policy?
Mm-hmm.
The smallest of all of your policies,
No, it wasn't the smallest, but it was a small policy.
besides the Life Map $2,500
Right,
policy.
but it was the smallest.
The only one you
That one.
offered to Detective Posey was the smallest policy.
Yes.
During the same conversation that you're asking him for a letter of exoneration.
I'm asking to see if that's something that he would have said, oh, sure, we'll do that for you, or if he said no. I mean, I was prepared for the worst. I was prepared for him to say no.
Sure. Isn't it true that you actually talked to all your insurance policy companies
did.
that day?
I did. And not a one of them asked for that, but Forrester's.
Okay, so you called all your life insurance companies,
Mm-hmm.
notified them of Dan's death.
Yes.
One of them asked you for a letter of exoneration.
Mm-hmm.
You asked Detective Posey for that.
I asked if it was possible to get that.
So when did Susan Estrada get into town?
Susan got in, Dan, okay, let me think for a minute here. Susan got in on that Friday, the following Friday. So Dan died on Saturday the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. She would have gotten into town on the 8th of June.
So you would agree that she was not with you when you made that call to Detective Posey?
I would. And I don't think I think I told her about it and her memory was just off on it.
Sure. She
I
was
don't
not
think-
sitting next to you while you made that call?
No. I would think that after 4 years, her memory was just fuzzy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you telling us why she forgot or something?
I was telling you what I thought happened. I thought her memory was fuzzy on what happened.
The prosecution pointing out that Nancy is making assertions over why other people are wrong or why the testimony that others gave doesn't match up with hers is subtle but effective. Nancy had stated that multiple people, like her friend and Dan's mother, have lied on the stand because she is the only one telling the truth. Pointing out the slight ways she tries to assert she knows better than them helps establish how little of what she says makes sense when held up to scrutiny.
Ms. Brophy, I want to start. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. I want to start just clarifying something from yesterday
Okay.
that I believe you testified to. You said when you got downtown later that morning of June 2nd that you kind of figured what was going on based on how people were reacting around you. But it is true that nobody actually told you that it was Dan that had been killed until Detective Posey, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that was during that interview.
Yes.
But you stated that Karen called you before you went into that interview,
Yes.
Dan's mother, Karen,
Yes.
and that you told her that it was Dan and that he was dead,
Yes.
based on the fact that you thought that Dan had been killed.
It was more than think.
But you hadn't been told.
I had not been told, but I had not heard from him. All of his friends avoided looking at me, and the police officers knew who I was before I got there, and one police officer hugged me. This is not good news I'm going to hear.
What if you were wrong?
Then I would have called Karen and said, happy days, I was wrong. And Karen and I would have celebrated and we would have laughed and we would have had family jokes about this for 20 years and it would have been much, much better than it turned out.
Out of everything in the entire trial, this moment may be the most damning. Nancy having to admit to knowing her husband was dead and telling his relatives he had died prior to her being told is the proverbial nail in the coffin. Her reasoning that it just couldn't be anything else based on how people were acting is nonsense as well, given that she had no idea at this point someone had died. Nancy believed she had an explanation for everything, and that if she was allowed to speak on her own behalf, she could swindle her way to freedom. But, much like her books, no one was buying it. If you want a full examination of the cross-examination, let me know. But for brevity's sake, Nancy destroyed her own arguments on the stand, and after having a very short deliberation, she was found guilty of second-degree homicide. When the verdict was read, Nancy showed no reaction and simply stared straight ahead, as if nothing had occurred. She is yet to be sentenced at the time of this recording, but according to Dan's family, they feel as if justice was properly served in this case. Dan Brophy was a wonderful man. He had made the lives of everyone he came into contact with better, and his legacy shall live on. His students still carry the values he instilled in them, and despite his tragic demise, he still lives in their memories. Thank you for watching another episode of Dreading. If you like this video, please hit the like button as it does help push our videos into the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you appreciate this content. If you have any video suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below or email me at the email in the channel's bio. If you want to see videos early and support the channel, as we are regularly demonetized, consider looking at our Patreon. Have a great day and remember to stay safe.